My name is Elena Marsh. I was 27 when I finally understood that love, in my family, had always come with a ledger nobody let me see. The dining room smelled like rosemary, and the candle my mother only lit for company. 6 plates, 6 wine glasses, and one silent sitting at the head of the table like an uninvited guest. My brother Theo had brought his girlfriend, a woman with a laugh like wind chimes, and my mother had brought her favorite subject, comparison. Theo just got promoted to regional director, she said, refilling everyone's glass but mine. 29 years old. Can you imagine? I could. I'd helped him rehearse the interview questions in my car outside his apartment 3 weeks earlier, coffee going cold in the cup holder, both of us laughing about the absurd corporate jargon he'd have to use.
I didn't say that.
I never said the parts where I helped. And Elena, my mother continued, turning to me with the practiced disappointment she'd perfected over a decade, still doing numbers. For other people's companies. She said numbers the way you'd say hobby. When are you going to actually build something? The table went quiet in that specific way, where everyone suddenly finds their napkin fascinating. My father cleared his throat and reached for the bread. Theo's girlfriend smiled at her plate like she wished she were somewhere else, anywhere else, possibly on a different continent. I do build things, Mom, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I build spreadsheets that keep small businesses from going under. I built the model that saved the Hendersons' hardware store last spring. That's not building. That's babysitting other people's mistakes. She said it lightly, like a joke, the kind of joke that only works if you agree to be the punchline. Some of us actually create legacies. You just maintain things. I looked at my plate. The rosemary chicken had gone cold. Something in my chest had gone colder. You've always been the failure of this family, she added, waving her fork like a conductor's baton, like this was simply fact, weather, the sky being blue. I don't say it to hurt you. I say it because someone has to. I felt Theo shift beside me, uncomfortable, but he didn't speak. He never did. He'd learned early that silence was safer than solidarity. I could have cried. 6 months earlier, I probably would have. But something had shifted in me over the last year, quietly, the way a foundation settles before anyone notices the crack in the wall. I set down my fork with a small, deliberate click against the china. Can I ask you something, Mom? She raised an eyebrow, already smiling at whatever apology she assumed was coming. Who do you think has been paying your mortgage for the last 14 months? The chime-laugh girlfriend stopped smiling. My father's hand froze halfway to the bread basket. And my mother, for the first time in longer than I could remember, said nothing at all. I hadn't planned to say it. The words had simply been waiting somewhere behind my ribs, patient as sediment, for 14 months of quiet transfers to finally surface. It started the way most invisible sacrifices start, small, reasonable, easy to justify. My father's hours at the plant had been cut. My mother, who had never worked outside the home in 31 years, called me crying about a letter from the bank. Not Theo.
Me.
Because Theo had just gotten his promotion and she didn't want to burden him during such an important time. I remember sitting on my apartment floor that night, calculator app open, rent due in 9 days, and doing math I didn't want to do. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself family meant showing up when no one else could see you doing it. So I showed up. Quietly. A transfer here, a covered utility bill there, an anonymous envelope of cash for Christmas that everyone assumed came from Dad's bonus. I never asked for thanks. I told myself I didn't need it. There's a particular kind of loneliness in being needed and unseen at the same time. You become load-bearing and invisible, like the beam inside a wall, necessary, structural, and never once admired for holding the roof up. I remember one Sunday call where my mother spent 20 minutes describing Theo's new car, how proud she was, how it proved he was finally becoming someone. I sat on my kitchen floor, having just wired her mortgage payment an hour earlier, and said, "That's wonderful, Mom."
Just that.
2 words, swallowed whole, alongside everything I wasn't saying. I told myself the silence was generosity. Looking back, I think it was fear that if I ever asked to be seen, I would find out definitively that I wasn't going to be. There's an old photograph on my mother's refrigerator, curling slightly at the corner. Theo at 7, holding a trophy the size of his torso, my mother's hand on his shoulder, her face lit up like a marquee. I am not in that photo. I was there. I remember being there, 12 years old, standing 3 feet outside the frame, but no one thought to move the camera. I kept helping anyway, not because I expected the frame to widen, because somewhere inside me, a stubborn, aching part still believed that love could be earned through quiet enough devotion, that if I just did enough, gave enough, disappeared into usefulness enough, eventually someone would turn around and see me standing there. They never did. Not until the night I stopped waiting for them to. The morning after the dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and 14 months of bank statements highlighted in yellow. I wasn't building a case for revenge. I was building something closer to a mirror, proof, mostly for myself, that I hadn't imagined any of it. $1,240 in March for the roof repair. $600 a month, every month, routed through an account my mother thought was help from her sister. My Aunt Rosalind had no idea her name was being used as a cover story. I'd asked her, once, gently, to let my mother believe the money came from her, because I couldn't bear another dinner where my contributions became ammunition for comparison. There is a strange kind of grief in documenting your own kindness. Each line item felt less like generosity and more like evidence of how long I'd been willing to erase myself to keep the peace. I thought about calling Theo. I didn't. Some part of me still wanted to protect him from a truth that would inevitably complicate his easy relationship with our mother. The one where he got to be brilliant without asking what that brilliance cost anyone else. Instead, I called my father. "Did you know," I asked, "that I've been covering the mortgage since last spring?" There was a long pause. I could hear him exhale, the particular sound of a man who has spent years choosing not to look too closely at the numbers his wife managed. "I knew someone was helping," he said finally. "I didn't want to ask who. I think I didn't want to know what that would mean about the rest of us." It wasn't an apology, but it was the first honest thing anyone in my family had said to me in over a year, and I found myself gripping the phone a little tighter, grateful for even that small, imperfect scrap of truth. "I'm not doing it to be a martyr, Dad," I said. "I did it because I love her. But I can't keep being called a failure at a table I'm quietly keeping standing." "I know," he said. And then, quieter, "I'm sorry I let it go on this long." After we hung up, I sat with the spreadsheet a while longer, watching the cursor blink over a column of numbers that had, without my noticing, become the shape of my own self-respect. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my mother to see the floor she was standing on. I wanted, for once, to stop being the beam inside the wall. 3 days after the dinner, Theo showed up at my apartment uninvited, which was unlike him. He stood in my doorway in his work blazer, looking like a man who had rehearsed a sentence the whole drive over and lost his nerve somewhere in the elevator. "Is it true?" he asked. "The mortgage thing?" I stepped aside and let him in. He sat on the edge of my couch like he wasn't sure he was allowed to take up space in it. "It's true," I said. He was quiet for a long moment, turning a coaster over in his hands. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you were always the one she was proud of," I said, and it came out flatter than I intended, more observation than accusation. "I didn't want to be the person who took that away from you. I figured you deserved to feel good about something, even if it wasn't the whole picture." "That's not fair to you," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." He asked how long, and I told him. He asked how much, and I told him that too, watching something in his face shift from disbelief into a kind of shame I hadn't expected and didn't particularly want to witness. I'd spent so long imagining this conversation as vindication that I'd forgotten it might just feel like grief for both of us. "I always thought you just didn't need anything," he said. "You seemed so put together. I never thought to ask what it was costing you." "Nobody did," I said. That was sort of the point. I made it easy not to ask. He put his head in his hands, and for the first time in years, my brother, golden, promoted, effortlessly adored, looked smaller than the frame everyone had built around him. "I've been living in a story where I earned everything on my own," he said. "I didn't earn the peace of mind that let me focus on my career. You paid for that. I just never knew the bill existed." I didn't tell him it was fine. It wasn't entirely, and I was tired of saying things were fine when they weren't. But I told him I appreciated him saying it out loud, and that felt closer to honest. Before he left, he turned back at the door. What are you going to do? With Mom, I mean. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm not disappearing into the wallpaper anymore. That much I know. I didn't confront my mother again right away. Instead, I wrote her a letter. The kind of letter you write knowing you might never send it, and then, once it exists, can't quite bring yourself to destroy. Dear Mom, I've spent most of my life trying to be useful enough to be loved out loud, instead of just in private. I think I believed that if I gave enough, quietly enough, eventually you'd see me the way you see Theo, not because I ever wanted to take his place, but because I wanted a place of my own that didn't require me to disappear first. I paid your mortgage for 14 months, not because I wanted credit, but because I love you, and because watching you struggle broke something in me that I didn't know how to leave broken. I don't regret helping you. I regret how small I let myself become in the process of helping. You called me a failure at dinner in front of people I'll probably never see again, and the worst part isn't even the word. It's that you said it while standing on ground I was quietly holding up. I don't need you to apologize for every year of comparison. I need you to understand that love without acknowledgement isn't humility. It's erasure. And I am done erasing myself to keep your version of the family story tidy. I'm not asking you to make Theo smaller so I can feel bigger. I'm asking you to make room for both of us to be real, complicated, whole people, the golden one and the quiet one, the visible sacrifice and the invisible one. We were never supposed to be in competition. You put us there. I love you. I'm also done being unseen. Elena. I never mailed it. I read it aloud to myself instead. Alone in my kitchen, candle unlit. No audience, but the refrigerator hum and my own steadying breath. Somewhere in the reading, I realized the letter wasn't really for her at all. It was the first time I had said all of it uninterrupted to someone who was finally listening, myself. My mother called on a Thursday evening, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. Can we talk? She asked. Just us. No dinner, no audience. We met at a diner 2 towns over, neutral ground, the kind of place where no one was performing for anyone. She looked older than she had at that table, or maybe I was simply seeing her clearly for the first time. Your father told me everything, she said, stirring sugar into coffee she wasn't drinking. About the mortgage. About how long? 14 months, I said. You knew someone was helping. You told everyone it was Aunt Rosalind. I knew, she admitted, and her hands trembled slightly around the mug. I told myself it didn't matter where the money came from. I think, somewhere, I didn't want to know it was you, because then I'd have to reckon with how I've treated you. You called me a failure, I said. Not shouted. Just said, the way you'd state a fact you'd finally stopped being afraid of. I know. Her eyes were wet now, and for the first time in my adult life, my mother looked genuinely afraid of losing something. I think I compared you to Theo because comparing felt safer than admitting I didn't know how to love 2 children who needed different things from me. He needed praise. You needed to be praised too, and I just never gave it because you never seemed to need it the way he did. I needed it, I said quietly. I just learned not to ask. She reached across the table, and I let her take my hand, though some part of me stayed guarded, watching. I'm not going to pretend 14 months of silence gets fixed over pie, she said. But I want to try. I want to actually see you. Not the version of you that pays quietly and says nothing. You. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't even close to enough, not yet. But it was the first time she'd asked to see me instead of simply expecting me to be seen through. I didn't stop helping my parents after that conversation, but I stopped helping in silence. I told my mother, plainly, what I could and couldn't give, and for the first time, she listened instead of comparing. Theo and I started talking more, really talking, not just holiday small talk performed for our mother's benefit. He told me once, over coffee, that he'd started asking her, gently, to acknowledge things out loud. I told her I don't want to be the good example anymore if it means you're the warning story, he said. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was just true, and it was more than he'd offered in years. My father and I grew closer too, in the quiet way that happens after a family finally stops pretending. He started calling just to talk, no crisis attached, which felt like its own small miracle.
I kept my job.
I kept building spreadsheets that saved small businesses, and I stopped apologizing for the shape of my ambition just because it didn't look like a corner office or a company car. I framed a small note to myself and pinned it above my desk. Quiet work is still work. Quiet love still counts. At Thanksgiving, my mother raised her glass and said, without prompting, without anyone asking her to, "I want to thank Elena for a lot of things I didn't say thank you for a long time." The table went quiet again, but differently this time. Not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of people finally sitting with something true. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that in private, over years, in kitchens and car seats and quiet Sunday afternoons. Instead, I just nodded and let the moment be exactly as small and as significant as it was. I think about that dinner sometimes, the candle, the cold chicken, the word failure landing in the room like a stone dropped into still water. I used to think the story ended the moment I asked my mother who'd been paying her bills. It didn't. That was only the moment the water stopped being still. What came after was slower and less cinematic, and infinitely more important. The letter I never sent but needed to write, the coffee with my father, the diner conversation where my mother finally asked to see me instead of measuring me. None of it undid the years. None of it needed to. Healing, I learned, isn't an eraser. It's a room you build next to the old one, with better light. I don't need my mother to call me the successful one now, or Theo the golden one, or anyone to sit at the head of any table handing out verdicts like place cards. I built something quieter than a legacy, a version of myself that doesn't need a witness to know its own worth. Sometimes, late at night, I still open that old spreadsheet, the one with 14 months of yellow highlights. I don't look at it with anger anymore. I look at it the way you'd look at an old photograph you're finally allowed to be in, proof that I was there all along, holding up more than anyone noticed, and that noticing, when it finally came, didn't have to arrive with fireworks to be real. The house still stands.
So do I.
That, in the end, was the only kind of triumph I ever actually wanted. Elena never got applause for those 14 quiet months. She didn't need it. What she needed, and finally got, was to be seen. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to fight back. It's to simply stop disappearing. If this story hit home, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been the quiet one holding things together? Subscribe for more stories like this one, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.